Do you grow up in a Christian home?
Man, I didn't. I kind of have a similar story like you, where my parents didn't really talk about God. My dad was a Creaster Catholic. You know, he would take us on Christmas, Easter, and so he had that background where he would make us go. And so I remember as a little boy doing the little cross and putting this water on, but nothing really talked about after that little mass thing. And I think he did it more to appease his mom, because she was a little bit more into the church than he was. But it wasn't until I had an older sibling, a sister that was 19 years old. I was 10 years old at the time. She became pregnant. She had a boyfriend, and so they weren't married or anything. And so she was with child, and she was going through this whole process of getting ready to have the baby, and she got a virus. She got like a flu bug or something, and it got very serious. She was hospitalized, and it turned out that the virus was so serious that it ended up killing the baby. And I remember the night after the baby died that my dad came into my room. I was asleep, and he sat on my bed. And dude, I can't explain how I knew this, because there wasn't really any indication that this is going to be the fact, but I just raised up in bed. I was asleep, and I said, "My sister died." He goes, "Yeah, she did." And so she died, and she was like very close to me. Mm-hmm. She hung out with me all the time. I wasn't that little brother that was a nuisance, but I took it very hard, dude. And as a 10-year-old, to process somebody that you love dying, that was a lot. So I started asking a lot of questions. Where's she at, and how do we know she's in heaven? And we had this aunt that was a Christian, and so she was kind of talking to me a little bit about God. And I remember talking to my mom saying, "I'd like to go to church." And it turned out that I really didn't understand this at the time, that my sister had been going to a group called FCA, Fellowship of Christian Athletes, because she's a big softball player. And she had prayed the sinner's prayer. She had received Christ, and I found all this out. And so that's what caused me to say, well, I want to go to church. So as a fifth grader, I started just showing up at this church with my mom, and we went a couple times, and then she stopped going, and of course I stopped going. But then when I went into junior high, some friends invited me to this Baptist church, and so I just started showing up and just really processing this idea of eternity. But even as a junior higher, I wasn't really getting it a whole lot, other than I had a heart for God. Mm. And it wasn't until I was a freshman in high school that I went to this winter camp called Hume Lake, and a speaker was given the message, and he said, if you want to give your life to Jesus, if you want to surrender to Him and create a life where you follow Him, stay afterwards, and we're going to have some people pray for you. So I stayed afterwards, man, and I had somebody pray for me, and that was cool. I mean, I was excited about it as a freshman in high school, but as most high school kids go through, I had a lot of pressures and temptations, invited to parties all the time, and so I was dabbling with church and with partying, and really didn't come to that place where I knew what it meant to just fully surrender to God. Mm-hmm. And then it was my freshman year of college. I went to a university called Cal Poly over in San Luis Obispo, and had a roommate that was smoking pot, and he wanted to party. And I had Christian posters up in my dorm, and so I was like, I don't really want that. That's not what I'm about. But it took me about 2 months, man, and I was totally away from God. I was back into all this stuff. But I was miserable the whole time too, and I would come home to my hometown in Bakersfield, and I would go to church, and I would cry. I'm like, this isn't what I'm meant to do. This isn't my purpose. And then I would go back the next week to school, and I'd mess up again. It was just like this horrible cycle. And then it was that summer that I came home, and I was in my backyard, and I was swimming. We had the swimming pool, and I was swimming by myself. And if God had an audible voice, man, it was so clear to me that I heard this voice, and I know it was inside of my head, but it might as well have been audible. He said, Jim, you're either for me or against me. In other words, you're either going to be all the way in or don't mention me, don't talk about me. And I just paused, you know, in that pool that summer day, and I just started thinking about what my life would look like if I just walked away from God, if I just pretended like God never existed and I never knew him, or I never prayed, or I never seen God do anything in my life. And I was like, okay, this is where I'm at. I'm either going to walk away from this thing, or I've got to figure out how I can go all the way in and just fully surrender to God. And immediately, dude, I got so scared because I knew enough about God to know he's real, and there was no denying him in my life. So I said, I only have one option. I've got to go find a church, and I've got to commit myself all the way. I got to be all in. And so I found this church where I'd been listening to this pastor on the radio, and I was like, man, that's a church I need to be a part of. And I just poured myself into this church, and I said, please help me. I need to, you know, I need some friendships that'll encourage me in this relationship I'm trying to build with God. And I stepped in and started doing ministry. And that's when I started hearing God speak to me. And that's when I started seeing God use me. And man, there was no more temptation to go and party or go smoke pot or go hang out and do crazy, stupid things in my life, because I was getting fulfilled. But that didn't happen until I fully surrendered my life to God. So then I just kept serving. I kept being faithful, all the little things that I was given. And pretty soon I started having opportunities to help the youth. Pretty soon, you know, they were asking me to speak to the youth. And next thing I know, you know, I got my pastor, he's saying, hey, you know, do you want to come on staff with us? I'm like, man, I never thought about this. I was going to school to be a veterinarian. And okay, maybe during summer, you know, while I'm out of school, I'll come and be on staff and help out. And so that's where it started. And I started kind of seeing maybe there was room in my life that maybe God would want to use me more than I ever imagined. And it was that next year, I happened to marry the pastor's daughter. That probably had something to do with it too. But he invited me to be full-time on staff at the church as a pastor. And so I stepped into that role, started being a high school pastor, started overseeing the college ministry, started doing all kinds of crazy things for the kingdom. And then about 3 years after that, my father-in-law and I, we got together, we started praying about maybe launching another campus somewhere, and that's where God put it on his heart to potentially launch a campus in Las Vegas. I said, you're crazy.
Right.
No, why go to Vegas? You know, that's so far away. That's crazy. But next thing I know, I'm in a car with him, and we're driving over here, and man, God met us and showed us without a shadow of a doubt that we have been called to start a church here. And that was back in 2002. And here we are in 2011. Who would have thought that I'd be the lead pastor of that same church here on 4500 West Sahara Avenue. So that's my story in a nutshell.
That's cool.